The most powerful man he had ever known. The man who could silence a room full of armed criminals with a single look. The man Charlie had watched intimidate politicians, judges, and rival bosses without raising his voice above a murmur. That man was lying at the bottom of the stairs like a broken doll, face down, one arm, twisted beneath him, completely, terrifyingly still. Charlie screamed. It wasn't the scream of a child having a tantrum. It wasn't even the scream of a child who had scraped his knee. It was something deeper and rawer than that, the sound of a child whose entire world had just cracked open at the foundation. He ran. He hit his knees on the marble floor beside his father's body and grabbed his arm, shaking him with both hands, the way you shake something you desperately need to work again. "Daddy, wake up! Daddy, please!" The second person on the scene was Veronica Hale, Vincent Cruz's fiancée. Vincent Cruz on the floor. Charlie crouched over him, shaking and crying. Veronica standing 3 feet back, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a low, rapid voice that Emily couldn't quite make out. Emily didn't think. She moved. She crossed the foyer in 6 steps, dropped to her knees beside Vincent, and pressed 2 fingers against the side of his neck. The world went very quiet for the 2 seconds it took her to find what she was looking for. A pulse, faint, unsteady, but there. "He's alive," she breathed, and she heard Charlie make a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp of relief. "Charlie, look at me, sweetheart. Your daddy is alive. Is he going to be okay?" Emily looked at the man lying motionless before her. His color was wrong, his breathing was shallow. She didn't know what had happened, Fall. Something else, but she knew they were wasting time. "I need to call an ambulance," she said, pulling out her own phone. And then Emily's question. "Who were you calling?" Vincent had felt something shift in his chest at that. Something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite respect, but was edging toward both. The nanny had noticed. The nanny, the quiet woman who made the children's lunches and read them bedtime stories and had never once asked for anything beyond her salary, and 2 Sundays off a month had looked at the situation, clocked the detail that didn't fit, and pushed back. While his fiancée stood 3 feet from his body calculating property transfers. He heard Veronica's footsteps move away, heard the murmur of her voice resuming lower, now moving toward the hallway. He caught fragments. Timing. Agreement. Before anything is finalized. His jaw tightened, his hands pressed flat against the cold floor, curled into fists, slowly and perceptibly controlled. Before anything is finalized. Their wedding was in 6 weeks. He thought about the prenuptial agreement his lawyer had been drafting for the past 3 months. The one Veronica had pushed back against, politely and persistently, suggesting revisions, requesting delays, steering the conversation away whenever he brought it up. He thought about the conversations he'd half noticed and half dismissed over the past year. Veronica asking about the estate. Veronica asking always casually, always with a smile, about his children's trust funds. Veronica spending 2 hours in his study one afternoon that she'd explained as looking for a book. He thought about the way she'd never once told his children she loved them. And he thought about the way Emily Hartwell had dropped to her knees on cold marble and pressed her fingers to his neck before she'd said a single word to anyone else. The voices shifted again. The sound of Veronica returning her footsteps, sharp and purposeful, accompanied by another voicemail, older one of the house staff. "He needs to be moved," Veronica was saying. "Get him off the floor and onto the ma'am." It was Marco, the night security chief, and his voice had a careful quality to it, the voice of someone threading a needle. "Protocol says we shouldn't move him if there's potential spinal. I don't care about protocol right now, Marco. I care about managing this situation." Silence, pause. Then Marco's voice, very quiet. "Should I call Mr. Cruz's personal physician?" A pause. "Yes, call Dr. Mancini, no one else." And Marco, her voice dropped. "This doesn't leave the house tonight. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Another pause. Longer. "Yes, ma'am," Marco said, but something in his tone had shifted. Vincent filed that away. Marco had been with him for 11 years. Marco had heard something in Veronica's words that had changed his voice, not fear, not compliance. Something closer to reluctant loyalty being tested. The children were in the kitchen. He could hear Elena's voice now carrying down the hallway. Not crying, not panicked, but asking questions in that precise, relentless way she'd had since she was 4 years old. She was grilling somebody about something. She didn't let things go. She never had. She was so much like him, it made his chest ache. Emily's voice answered her patient, steady, not quite convincing. Emily was trying to reassure a 9-year-old who was too smart to be reassured. He heard Elena say, "But why isn't Veronica with him?" And Emily's answer, a beat too long, a breath too careful. "She's handling some things, honey." And Elena, "What things? He's her fiancé. Shouldn't she be?" Elena, firm, gentle. "Drink your water." A beat. Then Elena, quiet and certain, with the voice of someone who has already made up their mind. "She doesn't actually love him, does she?" The silence that followed was answer enough. The pain behind Vincent's eyes was building slow and persistent, the kind that didn't ask permission. He needed to move soon. He needed a doctor, and not the one Veronica was calling, because he suddenly wasn't certain he trusted the judgment of anyone on Veronica's contact list. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. There was one more thing he needed. He needed her to say it out loud, clearly, unambiguously, in front of a witness. Because Vincent Cruz had not built what he'd built by moving on instinct alone. He'd built it on proof, on certainty, on making sure that when he acted there was no question, no room for doubt, no space for anyone to say later that he had been mistaken or hasty or cruel. He had learned this lesson once a long time ago, when he'd moved too fast on incomplete information and nearly destroyed something that couldn't be rebuilt. He would not make that mistake again. So he breathed. He waited. He kept his face slack and his body still, while the woman he'd nearly given his name to paced above him making plans. And he listened. Veronica moved back into the foyer. He heard her heels on the marble, that sharp, deliberate click that he had once found elegant and now recognized as the sound of someone marking territory. She crouched down near him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same perfume she'd worn the night he'd proposed, the night she'd cried and told him she'd never felt safe until she met him. She was not crying now. "Vincent?" Her voice was barely above a murmur. Testing. "Vincent, can you hear me?" He didn't respond. A pause, then softer almost to herself. "Good." She stood. He heard her take 2 steps away, heard her dial again, and this time he heard everything. "Yes, I know what time it is. Listen, the situation has changed. Vincent had an accident." A pause. "No, I don't know how serious. But if it is serious, if this goes the way I think it might, I need the transfer moved up. All of it. Before any legal complications arise." Another pause. "Exactly, before the children can contest anything." "Yes." Her voice dropped further. "And I need you to call the lawyer. Have the documents ready, just in case." Vincent lay perfectly still. The lawyer, not the doctor, not emergency services. The lawyer. He had heard enough. His hand pressed flat against the floor at his side, curled one final time slowly, silently, and then relaxed. One slow breath, then another, and then with the particular bone-deep calm of a man who has just made an irrevocable decision, Vincent Cruz opened his eyes. He wasn't dead. He was just getting started. Vincent opened his eyes, not the slow, groggy flutter of a man coming back from unconsciousness. His eyes opened the way they always did, sharp, immediate, fully present, and the first thing they found was the back of Veronica Hale's silk robe as she stood 6 feet away, phone still pressed to her ear, voice low and intent, believing with complete certainty that the man on the floor behind her was still out cold. He let her believe it for 4 more seconds. Then he said calmly and clearly, "Veronica." She spun so fast she nearly dropped the phone. The color drained from her face in a single visible wave, starting at her forehead and moving downward, and for one unguarded moment Vincent saw something he had never seen on her face before. Raw, unfiltered panic. Not the panic of someone afraid for the person they loved. The panic of someone whose plan has just detonated prematurely in their hands. She recovered. God, she was fast. The mask came back up before most people would have even registered it had fallen. "Vincent." Her voice broke on purpose, he realized. The crack in it was calculated. "Oh, thank God, I was so frightened. I didn't know what to." "Who's on the phone?" he asked. She looked at the phone in her hand as though she'd forgotten it existed. The doctor. I was calling Dr. Mancini." "Put it on speaker." A beat. Just one. but it lasted a lifetime. What? Put the phone on speaker, Veronica. His voice hadn't risen a single degree. It never did when he was this angry. The angrier Vincent Cruz got, the quieter he became, and right now he was speaking in barely more than a murmur. I'd like to thank whoever's been kind enough to take your call at this hour. Her throat moved. Vincent, you just fell down a staircase. You need to rest. You need speaker. Now. She looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. The call dropped, she said. It did it? Vincent, I promise you, I was trying to help. I panicked. I know I didn't handle it the way I should have, but I was scared, and She crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and reached for his face with both hands. And it was the tenderness in the gesture, the practiced perfect tenderness, that finally made something cold and final settle in his chest. He caught her wrist before her hands reached him. Gently, firmly. Don't, he said. Her eyes searched his. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. Get Marco, he said. And Emily. I want everyone in this room in the next 2 minutes. Vincent. Veronica. He looked at her steadily. Get Marco. She got Marco. Bah. Emily heard her name called from down the hallway and felt her stomach clench. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table with Elena and Charlie for the past 20 minutes, hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched, watching the children with the specific vigilance of someone waiting for the next bad thing to happen. Elena had stopped asking questions, which somehow felt worse than the questions. The girl had gone very quiet and very still, and her eyes had the distant quality of someone running calculations behind them. Charlie had fallen asleep against Emily's arm, exhausted from crying, one small fist curled against his chest. When Marco appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, Emily, he's asking for you, Emily felt 2 things simultaneously, relief so sharp it was almost physical, and a cold creeping dread she couldn't name. He's asking for you. Present tense. Conscious. Asking. He's awake, she whispered. Marco's expression was careful. Come see. She looked at the children. Elena looked back at her, reading everything in Emily's face the way she always did. Go, Elena said quietly with a steadiness that no 9-year-old should have to possess. I'll watch Charlie. Emily went. She stopped in the doorway of the foyer and took in the scene in one rapid sweep. Vincent Cruz was sitting upright, his back against the base of the staircase, his left hand pressed to the side of his head where he'd struck the newel post. He was pale. He was clearly in pain, but his eyes were open, alert, and fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. Veronica stood 8 feet away, arms crossed, jaw set, watching Emily's entrance with the undisguised contempt of someone who has just realized they're losing a game they thought they were winning alone. Marco stood near the hallway entrance, expression professionally neutral, which meant he was working very hard at it. You called for me, Emily said. Close the door, Vincent said. She closed it. Come here. She crossed the room and stopped a few feet from him, her eyes moving briefly to the bruise already forming at his temple before snapping back to his face. You need a hospital, she said. Head injuries can... I know what head injuries can do. His voice was quiet. Emily, when you found me when you first came into this room, what was Veronica doing? The air pressure in the room changed. She felt Veronica's attention sharpen to a point. She was on the phone, Emily said. Do you know who she was calling? Emily's throat moved. She was acutely aware of Veronica's eyes on her own. She told me she was calling the doctor. But the word hung in the air. Emily looked at Vincent. She thought about the grip on her wrist. She thought about this is a family matter. She thought about Elena's voice in the kitchen 20 minutes ago. She doesn't actually love him, does she? And the silence that had followed it. She made her decision. But I heard her say Dad before she lowered her voice. The room didn't explode. It went very, very quiet. That's a lie. Veronica's voice was ice. She was nowhere near me. She couldn't have heard anything. I was 6 feet away, Veronica. You were across the room. You grabbed my wrist, Emily said, and her own voice surprised her with its steadiness. You told me not to call an ambulance. You told me it was a family matter. And before that, I heard you say Dad and then the words property transfer. Veronica turned to Vincent. She's lying. She's a disgruntled employee trying to cause problems. She's been angling for more authority in this house for months. You've seen how she oversteps. This is exactly the kind of thing. Veronica. Vincent's voice cut cleanly through hers. Stop talking. She stopped. He was looking at her the way Emily imagined he looked at people across negotiating tables. The way that made grown men serious men, men with their own dangerous histories, shift in their chairs and reconsider their positions. The full weight of it, undiluted. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want the truth. Not a version of the truth, not the truth shaped to sound like something else, the actual unedited truth. A pause. Can you do that? Veronica's chin lifted. Of course, Boris. Who did you call first, he said. When you saw me on the floor, who was the first person you called? The pause was half a second too long. The doctor, she said. Vincent nodded slowly. Marco. Sir, did Dr. Mancini call you or anyone on the medical staff? Marco's jaw tightened. No, sir. No calls came through to me from Dr. Mancini tonight. Veronica's eyes flicked to Marco with something vicious in them. The call may not have connected. I told you it dropped. Your father's name is Gerald Hale, Vincent said conversationally. He's a property attorney. He's been handling your family's estate restructuring for 6 years. His direct line begins with the same 3 digits as Dr. Mancini's office number. He tilted his head slightly. Is that why you thought I wouldn't notice the difference? Because the numbers look similar. The blood left Veronica's face for the second time that night. I don't know what you think you heard, she said carefully, but you have a head injury. You're confused. I wasn't confused when I was lying on this floor, Vincent said. I've been conscious for the past 30 minutes for Veronica. Every word you said, every call you made, every instruction you gave. He paused. Before anything is finalized, that's what you said, wasn't it? Before the children can contest anything. Have the documents ready, just in case. The silence that came then was different from every silence that had come before it. It was total. Salute. The kind that happens when there is nothing left to say because everything has already been said. Veronica stared at him. Something in her face went through several rapid changes, panic, calculation, denial, and then finally something almost like relief. The relief of someone who has been performing for a very long time and is exhausted by it. You were awake, she said, not a question, not quite an accusation. Something more like wonder. I was awake, he confirmed. Her jaw hardened. You were testing me. I was listening, he corrected. There's a difference. Testing implies I already knew the answer. I was listening because I needed to know the truth. He looked at her steadily. Now I do. For a long moment, Veronica didn't move. Then she laughed. It wasn't the laugh Emily expected, not hysterical, not brittle. It was a short, genuine sound, almost amused, as though she had just appreciated the mechanics of something clever. 14 months, she said. I spent 14 months and you caught it in one night. You almost had me, Vincent said, and the absence of anger in his voice was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. That's the truth, you almost did. You're very good. I know I am, but you made one mistake. Just one. She tilted her head. Something like her old composure was returning, not the warmth which had always been manufactured, but the cool self-possession that was apparently genuine. You didn't account for Emily, he said. Veronica's eyes moved to Emily then, and what was in them wasn't quite hatred, it was something more specific than that. It was the precise personal animosity of someone who has been undone by a variable they underestimated. The nanny, she said softly, the person in this room, Vincent said, who checked my pulse before she said a single word to anyone else. He looked at Emily when he said it, and Emily felt the weight of his attention in a way that was entirely different from every time he had ever looked at her before. While you were working out property transfers, Emily was making sure I was alive. I think that's a significant distinction. Veronica was quiet for a moment. Then she said very simply, what happens now? Marco is going to call Dr. Mancini, the real one, and have him come to the house. Vincent pressed his hand more firmly against his temple. And then Marco is going to help you pack. Her breath caught, just barely, but it caught. Tonight. Tonight. And the children, something dangerous moved across Vincent's face. You don't get to ask about the children. She looked at him for a long moment. Whatever argument she'd been building, she let it go. She nodded once sharp, decisive, the gesture of someone choosing the exit with the most dignity available to them. Then she looked at Emily, one last look prolonged and deliberately uncomfortable. "Enjoy your promotion," she said. "Go, Veronica," Emily said. And to Emily's surprise and perhaps Veronica's own, she went. The room breathed again. Marco was already on his phone, stepping toward the hallway, his voice low and efficient. Emily stood very still in the center of the foyer, listening to the click of Veronica's heels ascending the staircase. Deliberate, unhurried, the walk of someone who refuses to be seen as fleeing, even when they are. And she became gradually uncomfortably aware that she and Vincent Cruz were now, for the first time in 2 years, alone in a room together without children between them. "Sit down, Emily." "I'm fine, son. I wasn't asking because I was worried about you." A pause. "Sit down because my neck hurts from looking up at you." She sat, not beside him on the bottom stair, close enough to be addressed, far enough to maintain the architecture of their usual dynamic. Nanny and employer, clear, uncomplicated, safe. "You heard her on the phone," he said. "Yes." "And you pushed back." "Someone had to." "You knew she could fire you." Emily considered this. "She wasn't actually going to fire me," she said finally. "She was going to wait until after the wedding and then find a reason." That's how she operated. Vincent was quiet for a moment. "You've been watching her." "I've been watching you, Maid," Emily said, and then heard how that sounded and felt the heat move into her face. "I mean, I watch everything that affects the children. And the way she treated them, the way she looked at them, it affected the children. Every single day." "What do you mean?" She looked at him. He looked back, genuinely asking, and she understood suddenly that he had been so deep inside his own world, the business, the danger, the constant vigilance of being who he was, that he had genuinely not seen what was happening directly in front of him. "Elena stopped talking at dinner 3 months ago," she said. "Not because she was shy, because every time she said something, Veronica found a way to make her feel small for saying it. She's 9, Mr. Cruz. She learned to be silent around the woman who was about to become her stepmother, because silence was safer." She paused. "Charlie started wetting the bed in October. He was mortified. He didn't tell you because he was afraid you'd think he was a baby, and Veronica had already told him once that big boys his age didn't cry." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "Those are not things a 7-year-old should be carrying." Vincent said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, scraped of his usual control in some subtle way she couldn't quite define. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because every time I tried to bring the children's welfare to your attention, Veronica was in the room within 60 seconds. Emily looked at him steadily. "She had positioned herself between you and everyone in this house. That was the whole architecture of it, Mr. Cruz. She wasn't just marrying you, she was replacing the environment around you, one person at a time." The silence that followed that was the kind Emily felt in her bones. "Then, how long have you known that she was wrong for you since the 2nd month?" She paused. "That she had a specific, deliberate plan tonight." He leaned his head back against the staircase and closed his eyes, just for a moment. Just long enough to be something other than Vincent Cruz, the man who commanded rooms, who never showed pain, who had spent a lifetime treating his own vulnerability as a liability. He looked exhausted. He looked hurt. He looked for the space of about 4 seconds like an ordinary man who had narrowly survived something that should not have been allowed to get as close as it did. Then he opened his eyes, and whatever had been there was gone. "The children," he said. "Are they all right?" "Elena is with Charlie in the kitchen. She's been extraordinarily brave." Emily couldn't quite suppress the pride in her voice. "She's her father's daughter." Something moved across his face, fast, private, and more naked than anything she'd seen from him all night. "She's better than her father," he said quietly. Emily didn't answer that. Some things didn't need answering. From upstairs came the sound of drawers opening, the muffled thud of luggage. Veronica packing. The sound was absurdly ordinary for what it represented: the dismantling of 14 months of careful construction, the unwinding of a plan that had come within 6 weeks of succeeding completely. Emily thought about the wedding invitations that had already gone out, the venue deposit, the dress hanging in Veronica's closet upstairs, which she was presumably looking at right now. She thought about the prenuptial agreement that had never quite been finalized, and she thought about why, and she thought about what would have happened to these children if Vincent had not fallen down those stairs tonight, if he had simply married her, if the accident had not created by pure chance the conditions for the truth to surface. She thought about how close it had been. And then she felt something she hadn't expected, a cold dropping certainty moving through her because a thought had just occurred to her that she hadn't let herself think until now. The fall. Vincent had said it was an accident. He'd missed the bottom step in the dark. But he never used that staircase at night. She knew his patterns the way she knew the children's, not from surveillance, but from proximity, from 2 years of living in the orbit of someone's daily rhythms. Vincent Cruz used the back stairs when he came in late. He had for as long as she could remember. Why was he on the front staircase at 2 in the morning? She looked at him. He was watching her, and something in his expression told her with a certainty she couldn't explain that he had just seen the question form in her face. "Emily," he said. Yes, a pause. Long enough to be a decision. "Don't ask me that question tonight." She stared at him. He held her gaze, and what she read in his was not evasion, not guilt, but something more complex than either. A warning, a request, and beneath both of those things, something that looked against all reason, almost like protectiveness. "Don't pull this thread tonight." She didn't pull it, but she didn't let it go either. And from the kitchen, cutting through the silence like a small, clear bell, came Elena's voice. "Emily, is Daddy okay?" Emily stood. She smoothed her robe. She found her voice. "Yes, baby," she called back. "Your daddy's okay." She looked at Vincent one more time. He was still watching her with that unreadable expression, hand pressed to his temple, looking for all the world like a man who had just won something and wasn't sure yet what it had cost him. "Get your doctor here," she said quietly. "Please." "Already done," he said. She nodded and walked toward the kitchen, toward the children, toward the part of this night she knew how to handle. Behind her, she heard him exhale. Just once. Long and slow, the way you breathe when you've been holding something for a very long time. She did not turn around, but she heard it, and she filed it away in the place where she kept all the things about this family that she would never speak aloud, a place that had been filling up quietly and inevitably for the past 2 years. The night was not over. Not by a long way. Dr. Mancini arrived at 3:20 in the morning with a black bag and the particular expression of a man who had been the Cruz family physician long enough to have stopped being surprised by anything. He examined Vincent in the study. Emily had insisted firmly that the foyer floor was not an appropriate place for a medical assessment, and Vincent, for once, had not argued and emerged 20 minutes later with a verdict that was equal parts reassuring and sobering. Mild concussion. 2 cracked ribs from the impact with the newel post. Nothing that required hospitalization provided he rested, provided he didn't push himself, provided the headache didn't worsen, or the vision didn't blur. Marco, standing in the hallway outside the study door, had listened to all of this with his arms crossed and an expression that said he knew exactly how seriously Vincent Cruz was going to take the instruction to rest. Emily had listened from the kitchen doorway. One hand on Elena's shoulder, the girl had refused to go back to bed, had planted herself at the kitchen table with the quiet, immovable stubbornness of someone who understood instinctively that this was not a night for sleeping, and she'd let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. Cracked ribs. Concussion. He was going to be all right. She told herself that the relief was professional. She almost believed it. Charlie slept through all of it, still curled in the chair where he had drifted off, his small chest rising and falling, with the uncomplicated peace of a child who had cried himself empty and handed the rest of the night to the adults. Emily watched him for a moment, that face, those dark lashes against pale cheeks, the way he looked so much like his father when he was asleep, and felt the fierce, irrational protectiveness that had become as natural to her as breathing tightened in her chest. "Emily," Elena's voice quiet and precise. "Veronica's coming downstairs." She heard it a half-second later, the wheels of luggage on hardwood, deliberate measured footsteps, the sound of someone making a performance of their own exit. Then, Veronica descended the main staircase with 2 suitcases and her chin at the exact angle that communicated she was leaving because she chose to, not because she'd been told to. She had changed out of the silk robe. She was dressed now as though for a business meeting, structured, coat heels, hair perfect. The only concession to the hour and the chaos was the slight tension around her jaw, the single line of strain between her brows that no amount of composure could quite smooth away. Marco was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He'd called a car. It was already outside. Veronica stopped when she reached the foyer. She looked at Marco. She looked at the front door. Then, as though drawn by something she resented, her gaze moved down the hallway toward the kitchen, toward the light spilling under the door, toward the sound of Elena's voice asking Emily something in a low murmur. Marco said quietly, "The car's waiting, ma'am." "I know." She didn't move for another 3 seconds. Then she reached into her coat pocket and produced a set of keys, the house keys, the gate fob, the code card for the east wing, and set them on the entry table without looking at them, one by one, deliberately, like she was making a point about how little they meant to her. Marco picked them up. She moved toward the door, and then the kitchen door opened. Elena stood in the doorway, small, dark-eyed, her father's jawline in miniature, and looked at Veronica with an expression that was not childlike in any way that mattered. It was the expression of someone who has done their accounting and arrived at a number they can live with. Veronica stopped. "Elena," she said, her voice was careful, "you should be in bed." "I know," Elena said, exactly the way her father would have said it. A beat of silence. "I'm sorry things didn't work out," Veronica said, and Emily, watching from just behind Elena, thought, there it is, even now, even on the way out the door. The performance never actually stops. Elena looked at her for a long moment. "No, you're not," she said simply. "But that's okay. You don't have to be." Something moved across Veronica's face, fast gone before it could be named. She looked just briefly like she wanted to say something real. Like there was an actual human being somewhere beneath 14 months of careful engineering who had been startled into the surface by a 9-year-old who simply refused to pretend. She didn't say it. She walked out the door. Marco closed it behind her. The sound of the car pulling away was the most ordinary thing Emily had ever heard. Elena turned back to the kitchen. "Can I have some more water?" she asked. "Yes, baby," Emily said. "You can have whatever you want." Yeah, and it was nearly 4:30 in the morning when Vincent finally appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd changed out of the clothes he'd fallen in. Someone Marco probably had helped him, and he was moving with the careful economy of a man managing pain without wanting to display it. The bruise at his temple had deepened and spread. His eyes were dark and tired and entirely alert. He stopped in the doorway and looked at his children. Charlie asleep in the chair, Elena sitting at the table with her water, and her quiet watching him walk in with the same steady, serious gaze she'd had since she was 3 years old. Vincent Cruz had survived assassination attempts. He had sat across tables from men who wanted him dead and negotiated those tables to his advantage. He had buried a wife, rebuilt an empire, raised 2 children, inside a world that would have broken most people before breakfast. And the look on his face when he walked into that kitchen and saw his daughter watching him, waiting for him, refusing to sleep until she knew he was actually all right, was the most unguarded thing Emily had ever witnessed in this house. He crossed to the table. He sat down across from Elena. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Elena said, "Does your head hurt?" "Yes," he said. "No hedging?" "No, I'm fine, just yes." She nodded. "Dr. Mancini said you have to rest." "I know." "Are you going to?" He looked at her. "Probably not enough." "Dad." "I'll try," he said. And he said it with enough sincerity that Elena accepted it, which meant he meant it because Elena Cruz could detect a patronizing answer from approximately 40 feet and had been calling them out since she could talk. "Veronica's gone," Elena said. "I know." "She's not coming back." "No." He said it without softness, but without hardness either. Just fact. Delivered cleanly, the way you tell a child a true thing, not to protect them from it, but because they deserve the truth and are strong enough to hold it. Elena absorbed this. "Okay," she said, and then after a pause, "I didn't like her." "I know that too. I tried to. I know you did." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His hand was large enough to cover hers completely, and he left it there. "Elena, I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner. You were busy." "That's not an excuse." She looked at their hands. "No," she said, "but it's a reason. There's a difference. Yeah." She turned her hand over and curled her fingers around his. "Emily told me that. Reasons aren't excuses." Vincent's eyes moved to Emily, who was standing at the counter with her back carefully turned, making tea that no one had asked for, giving them as much privacy as the kitchen allowed. She felt his gaze on her back like a hand on her shoulder. "She's right," he said quietly. Emily got Charlie to bed at 5. He woke up just enough to walk, eyes barely open, and she guided him up the back stairs with one hand between his shoulder blades, tucking him in with the efficiency of long practice, smoothing the blanket without thinking about it, the way she'd done it 800 times before. She stood in his doorway for a moment after. The room was quiet. Charlie was already asleep again, his face peaceful, his breathing deep and even. On his desk was a half-finished drawing he'd been working on. She could make out the shapes without crossing the room. A house, stick figures in front of it. He'd been working on it for a week. Every time she saw it, there were more figures added. His family growing the way he imagined it. She'd noticed the first time she saw it that none of the stick figures had Veronica's distinctive long hair. She pulled the door closed and stood in the hallway for a moment, pressing her back against the wall, letting herself breathe in a way she hadn't been able to downstairs. The adrenaline of the night was finally metabolizing, and what it was leaving behind was the specific hollow exhaustion that comes after sustained fear, the kind of tired that lives in your joints and behind your eyes. She was still standing there when she heard footsteps on the back stairs. Slow, careful. The careful tread of someone managing 2 cracked ribs. She straightened. "You're supposed to be lying down." "Elena's finally asleep," Vincent said, reaching the top of the stairs and stopping in the hallway. "I stayed until she went under." He said it the way she'd said it 1,000 times in report. "I stayed until she went under," without apparently noticing he was using her language. "You should sleep too," Emily said. "I will." He didn't move toward his room. He stood in the hallway, and the particular quality of his stillness told her he had something to say that he hadn't said yet. She'd learned to read this about him over 2 years, that stillness was not the absence of thought, but the presence of a thought he was still deciding whether to voice. She waited. "The staircase," he said. Her heart did something complicated. "I told you not to ask me, Mom, about that tonight," he said. "But you didn't stop thinking about it. I could see it." "It's not my business," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not. But you're thinking about it anyway because you're the kind of person who follows things to their logical end even when someone tells you not to." He paused. "I need you to trust me that there are things I'm handling that I can't explain right now. Things that are already in motion. Tonight it accelerated a timeline, but it didn't change the fundamentals." She looked at him. He looked back. "Are the children safe?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you safe?" He paused. "Working on it," he said. It was such a direct, unguarded answer, so different from the careful non-answers she'd come to expect from him, that it took her a moment to process it. "That's not reassuring," she said. "I know, but it's the truth." She looked at him for a long time, the bruise at his temple, the controlled way he held himself against the pain. The exhaustion he was doing a reasonable but imperfect job of concealing. He was a man who was very good at appearing invulnerable, and tonight had put several significant cracks in the architecture of that appearance. And what showed through the cracks was something altogether more human and more difficult than Vincent Cruz usually allowed anyone to see. "Okay," she said finally. He blinked, slight surprise quickly contained. "Okay, I trust you." She said it simply without drama. Not blindly, but enough. She pushed off the wall. "Go lie down, Mr. Cruz. You have cracked ribs and a concussion, and it's almost 5 in the morning." "Emily." She stopped. He was looking at her with the expression she hadn't been able to name all night, the one that had appeared first when she told him about Elena's silence at dinner, about Charlie's bedwetting, about Veronica's careful architecture. The one that had nothing to do with strategy or calculation or control. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight, for all of it." It was 2 words. Simple, direct, completely insufficient for what had happened in this house over the past 3 hours, and somehow for that exact reason more meaningful than anything more elaborate could have been. "It's my job," she said. "No," he said, it isn't." She didn't answer that. She turned and walked toward her room, and she was almost to the door when his voice reached her one more time, quiet enough that she might have been meant to miss it. "It should have been, though," he said, "a long time ago." She kept walking. She closed her door. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and pressed both hands flat on her knees and breathed. Morning came the way mornings always do after nights that have rearranged everything too bright, too ordinary, with the particular cruelty of the sun refusing to acknowledge that the world it was shining on was not the same one it had left. Emily was up at 7. She had slept perhaps 90 minutes. She didn't feel it, the adrenaline had receded, but left something in its place, a heightened alertness, a sensitivity to sound and motion that kept her tuned to every creak of the house. She was making breakfast when Marco appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was dressed fully, which meant he hadn't slept at all. "We need to talk," he said. She set down the spatula. "About what?" Marco glanced toward the hallway, listening for footsteps, confirming the cost was clear, then stepped fully into the kitchen and lowered his voice. "Gerald Hale called the main gate at 6:15 this morning. Veronica's father. He was asking to be let onto the property." Emily felt something cold move through her. "What?" "He said he needed to collect some of Veronica's belongings, said she'd left some things behind." Marco's jaw was set. "I didn't let him in, but he said he'd be back." "Does Mr. Cruz know?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first." Emily stared at him. "Why me?" Marco looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone choosing their words with the precision of a man who has worked for a dangerous man long enough to understand what certain information costs. "Because," he said carefully, "Mr. Cruz will handle it the way Mr. Cruz handles things, which is effective, but he paused. "You asked different questions." "Marco, what are you not telling me?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He set it on the counter between them without unfolding it. "I found this," he said, "in the study, behind the third shelf on the left side. I wasn't looking for it." He met her eyes. "But I found it." Emily looked at the document. She looked at Marco. She reached out and unfolded it. It took her approximately 15 seconds to understand what she was reading. When she looked up, her face had changed. She could feel it, the blood leaving the jaw, tightening, the specific expression of someone who has just had a suspicion confirmed and finds confirmation no comfort whatsoever. "This is a copy of the prenuptial agreement," she said. "Look at the signature line," Marco said. She looked. Vincent Cruz's signature was there at the bottom, and it was dated 3 weeks ago. But the terms were not the terms of any agreement designed to protect the person signing it. The terms were the terms of an agreement designed with considerable legal sophistication to do the precise opposite. The property transfers, the asset allocations, the provisions regarding the children's trusts, all of it tilted so far in one direction that the word agreement was almost comic. "He signed this." Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's what I'm telling you," Marco said. "I don't know if that signature is real. I don't know if he knew what he was signing. I don't know if—" He stopped. "I don't know enough. But Gerald Hale is at the gate and this document exists, and I thought you should know before anything else happens this morning." Emily set the document down. She pressed her palms flat on the counter, the way she'd pressed them on her knees in the dark last night, steadying herself against something that kept moving. "Are you safe working on it?" She understood now what he'd meant, and she understood something else, something that made the bottom drop out of her carefully maintained sense of what last night had resolved. Veronica was gone. That part was over. But Gerald Hale was at the gate with a briefcase and a legal document bearing his potential son-in-law's signature, and the game that Veronica had been playing was not actually Veronica's game. It was her father's. Veronica had been the piece on the board, a Sindimana. Gerald Hale was the player, and he was at the gate. Emily picked up the document. She straightened her back. She turned toward the hallway. "Where are you going?" Marco asked. "To wake up Mr. Cruz," she said. "Emily." Marco's voice stopped her. Something in his tone, a warning or something adjacent to it. "Be careful with how much you push. He's not a man who likes feeling like he missed something." She looked back at him. He did miss something. "I know that," Marco said. "But there's a way to tell a man like Vincent Cruz that he was deceived, and there's a way that ends with everyone in the room regretting it." She thought about this. She thought about last night, about, "I trust you not blindly but enough," about the exhaustion behind his eyes and the way he'd said thank you, like the word cost him something. "I'll be careful," she said. She walked down the hallway with Gerald Hale's document in her hand and the weight of everything she knew pressing against her chest. And she did not slow down because their oh no version of this morning where slowing down was the right answer. She knocked on Vincent's door. 3 sharp knocks. Clear. Unambiguous. A pause. Then his voice rough with the sleep he'd barely gotten. "What is it?" She opened the door. He was sitting up already half awake, a man who slept the way he did everything with one part of his mind always at the surface. He looked at her face, then at the document in her hand. He went very still. "Marco found this," she said, "in the study." She crossed the room and set it on the bed in front of him. "And Gerald Hale is at the gate." Vincent looked at the document. He did not look surprised. That was the thing she hadn't expected. He looked tired and he looked angry. A deep, contained anger, the kind that has been living somewhere for a while, but he did not look surprised. Which meant he already knew. Which meant working on it was not the vague reassurance she'd taken it for. Which meant everything she thought had been resolved last night was only the surface of something that went considerably deeper. She sat in the chair by the window without being invited because this was not a morning for waiting to be invited, and she looked at him and said, "Tell me what's actually going on." He picked up the document. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at her. "Are you sure you want to know?" he asked. She looked back at him steadily. This woman who had spent 2 years inside the edges of his world, who had held his children through nightmares and kept his house running, and noticed every detail that he'd missed, who had pushed back against Veronica in the dark at 3 in the morning when she had nothing to protect herself with but the truth. "I'm sure," she said. Vincent Cruz looked at her for a long, measured moment. Then he sat up straighter, set the document aside, and began to talk. Vincent didn't start at the beginning. Men like him never did. They started at the part that mattered, the part that explained everything else, and let the listener work backward from there. "Gerald Hale has been trying to get his hands on the Cruz estate for 11 years, he said. His voice was flat, factual. The voice of a man reading from a document he had memorized a long time ago. Before Veronica, before the engagement, before any of it. He came at me through business first, bad deals, bad partners, shell companies designed to bleed specific assets. When that didn't work, he pivoted." He paused. "Veronica was the pivot." Emily sat very still. "He sent his own daughter." "He positioned his own daughter," Vincent said. "There's a difference. Veronica made her own choices inside the architecture he built. She wasn't unwilling." He looked at the document on the bed. "But the strategy, the timeline, the legal framework, that's Gerald. That's always been Gerald." "And you knew this," Emily said. "Not an accusation, a clarification." "I suspected it 4 months ago." He met her eyes. "I set a trap." The room went very quiet. "The prenuptial agreement," she said slowly. "Not the real one." He nodded at the document. "That is a fabrication. A very good one. I had my own lawyer construct it to look exactly like the kind of document Gerald would want. Terms that would benefit Veronica enormously. Provisions that would give Gerald legitimate legal access to certain asset structures if Veronica became my wife." He paused. "I had it placed where someone looking for it would find it. And then I waited to see who would find it." Emily stared at him. "You put a fake prenuptial agreement in your own study as bait." "Yes. And someone took that bait. 3 weeks ago, a copy appeared in Gerald Hale's possession. My people confirmed it." His jaw tightened. "Which told me 2 things. 1, Gerald had someone inside this house who was feeding him information. And 2, he believed the document was real, which meant he was ready to move. He just needed the marriage to happen first." Emily thought about this with the focused intensity of someone assembling a puzzle that kept revealing new edges. "So last night," she said, "your fall." "An accident," he said it firmly. "A genuine, stupid accident. I was coming down the front stairs because I'd heard something, a sound from the lower floor that turned out to be nothing. I missed the step. I went down." He looked at her. "But when I came back to consciousness and heard Veronica on that phone, I understood immediately that the accident had handed me something I hadn't planned for. A window. A chance to see what she'd do when she thought control had shifted." "You let her think you were unconscious for 30 minutes, Emily said, "with cracked ribs and a concussion." "Priorities," he said without particular apology. She looked at him for a long moment. "You are the most reckless, careful person I have ever met." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. That's probably accurate. So Gerald is at the gate, Emily said, pulling them back. Why Veronica's gone? The wedding isn't happening. The fake document doesn't hold any legal weight regardless of what he believes. What does he think he's going to accomplish? Vincent's expression changed. The almost smile disappeared. What replaced it was the look she'd seen last night, the controlled, cold anger of a man who has been calculating for a long time and has reached the end of his calculations. Gerald doesn't know yet that Veronica was removed. He doesn't know that I was conscious last night. As far as he's aware, his daughter is still in this house. I had an accident that may have provided an opportunity, and he is arriving this morning to assess the situation and potentially accelerate his timeline. He paused. He's not coming to collect Veronica's belongings. He's coming to see how bad my condition is and how quickly he can move. Emily's breath left her in a slow, controlled exhale. He's walking into your house thinking he has the upper hand. Yes. And you're going to let him walk in. Yes. She looked at the document. She looked at him. She thought about Elena at the kitchen table saying she doesn't actually love him, does she? And the silence that had followed, and she thought about Charlie's drawing with its stick figures and its missing figures. And she thought about 2 years of watching this man from the periphery of his life, filing away the things she saw, understanding more than she was supposed to, and saying less than she knew. What do you need me to do? She said. Marco let Gerald Hale through the gate at 8:47 in the morning. Gerald Hale was 62 years old, silver-haired, and wore his respectability the way certain men wore expensive watches, not to tell time, but to be seen wearing it. He had a lawyer's handshake and a banker's eyes and a smile calibrated to suggest warmth while communicating absolutely nothing. He'd been in the Cruz mansion twice before, both times with Veronica, both times at dinners where he'd been gracious and interested and asked exactly the right questions about the property, the history, the estate's various holdings, in the tone of a man merely making conversation. Emily had disliked him from the first moment and had spent 2 years telling herself that was uncharitable. She no longer felt bad about it. She was in the hallway when he came in, standing near the base of the staircase, the same staircase where Vincent had fallen 7 hours ago, with her hands clasped in front of her and her expression professionally neutral. Gerald looked at her, registered her, filed her in the category of staff. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "I'm here to see Vincent." "He's expecting you," Emily said. "This way." She walked him toward the study. She felt his eyes on the back of her head the whole way, assessing, categorizing, finding no threat in what he saw. A woman in her 30s, practical clothes, a nanny, the category of people who exist in the backgrounds of other people's lives, useful and invisible in equal measure. She opened the study door. Vincent was behind his desk. He was upright, composed, dressed. He looked, Emily thought, considerably better than any man with cracked ribs and a concussion had any business looking, which was either testament to his discipline or a quiet act of theater, or most likely both. The bruise at his temple was visible, darkening toward purple at the edges, and Gerald's eyes went to it immediately, assessing, recalculating. "Gerald?" Vincent's voice was warm, controlled, completely unrevealing. "Come in." Emily closed the door behind them and stood in the hallway because Vincent had not told her to leave, and the study door she knew was 3 millimeters from fully latched. "Vincent," Gerald's voice carried easily through that 3-millimeter gap. Warm concern, the voice of a man who had been practicing concern his whole professional life. "I heard what happened. My God. Are you all right?" "Sit down, Gerald." A pause, the sound of a chair being pulled. "I was shocked when I got the call. I tried to reach Veronica this morning and she wasn't answering. I assume she's still shaken." "Veronica isn't here," Vincent said. A beat, shorter than the one outside the foyer last night, but the same quality, the beat of someone recalibrating. "I'm sorry, Badrum. She left last night. We ended the engagement." Another beat, this one longer. Emily could feel Gerald working through the implications in real time, what this meant for the timeline, for the document, for 6 months of careful construction. "Vincent, you just had an accident. Surely the two of you were both under enormous stress. I don't think it's wise to make permanent decisions in that kind of—" "Gerald." Vincent's voice hadn't risen, hadn't changed. That particular absolute quiet. "I know about the document. The silence that followed was different from every silence Emily had cataloged in the past 8 hours. This one had a texture to it, a density. The silence of a man who has just heard a grenade go off and is waiting to feel the impact. I'm not sure what you mean, Gerald said. The prenuptial agreement, the copy that reached you 3 weeks ago, the provisions you've been structuring your timeline around. A pause. I know you have it. I know how you got it. Emily pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes briefly. This was it. Vincent. Gerald's voice shifted register, not panicked, not quite, but the warmth was gone, replaced by something more careful, more lawyerly. I think there may be a misunderstanding. There are no misunderstandings at this table, Gerald. That's a rule I operate by. The sound of something being set down paper on wood deliberate. I also know about the Meridian accounts, the cast and trust, the 3 shell entities that have been positioned for the past 14 months to receive asset transfers contingent on my marriage to your daughter. A pause. Shall I continue? The silence went on long enough that Emily opened her eyes. How, Gerald said finally. One word, stripped of everything except the genuine question underneath. The same way I know everything, Vincent said. I pay attention, and I'm patient, and I made it very easy for you to believe I wasn't. Another pause. The document you received is not the real agreement. I had it constructed for your consumption. The real agreement, the one that protects my children's interests with absolute specificity, was filed with my attorney 6 weeks ago. Before you had the copy, before the wedding date was set. A beat. Everything you've been planning around was a fiction I built to watch you walk into. The sound Gerald made was not quite a word. It was the sound a careful man makes when the floor he's been standing on reveals itself to be a trapdoor. The person inside this house who was feeding you information, Vincent said conversationally, has already been dealt with. The documentation of your financial positioning, the accounts, the trusts, the shell entities, has been in my lawyer's possession since Tuesday. In this conversation, a brief pause is being recorded. Emily heard the chair move. Hard. Fast. Gerald standing up. You can't. Sit down, Gerald. This is entrapment. Sit down, Vincent said again, and the second time it landed differently. Not louder, just heavier. The voice underneath it, the polite voice, the one that reminded you of exactly who you were talking to. Or stand. It doesn't change anything. A long moment, the chair moved again. Gerald sat back down. Here's what happens now, Vincent said. The Meridian accounts are going to be unwound. The cast and trust is going to be dissolved. The documentation your legal team has been preparing is going to be destroyed, and I'm going to receive written confirmation of that destruction. And you, Gerald, are going to step back entirely permanently from any involvement in anything connected to my name, my family, my business, or my children. He paused. In exchange for all of that, I'm not going to involve law enforcement. Not because you don't deserve it, but because it would put Veronica in a position she doesn't need to be in, and whatever she is, she's still your daughter, and I'm not willing to use her as a pressure point. A pause. That's a courtesy I'm extending based on nothing but my own preference. I want you to understand that. Gerald was quiet for what felt like a very long time. And if I don't agree, he said finally, then the recordings, the documentation, and the testimony of 3 people with direct knowledge of your financial positioning go to the federal attorney's office by Monday morning. Vincent's voice didn't change. Your choice. You have until I finish this cup of coffee. Emily was at the kitchen table when Marco passed through and gave her a single nod. The kind of nod that doesn't need translation. Gerald Hale had agreed. She wrapped both hands around her mug and let out a breath that seemed to start somewhere around her knees and work its way slowly up. Elena appeared in the doorway, dressed now, hair combed, looking about 12 years old and approximately 40 in equal measure. She looked at Emily's face. She looked at Marco's retreating back. Is it over? She asked. Emily thought about the right answer. The honest one. The one that would hold up to scrutiny when repeated back by a 9-year-old with her father's memory. The worst part is, she said. Elena considered this. There are other parts. There are always other part, baby, but the people who wanted to hurt your dad aren't going to be able to anymore. She looked at the girl. That's the part that matters. Elena nodded slowly. Then, I'm hungry, Emily laughed. A real one, involuntary, slightly ragged at the edges with exhaustion. Sit down, she said. I'll make pancakes. The ones with the blueberries. Yes. Elena sat. Charlie appeared behind her approximately 30 seconds later, having materialized from wherever 7-year-olds materialize from when someone says the word pancakes, his hair sideways and his eyes still creased with sleep. He dropped into his chair and looked at Emily with uncomplicated trust. Is Daddy awake? He asked. He's in his study. Can I see him? After breakfast. Charlie accepted this with the equanimity of a child who has woken up and found that the worst of the night is behind him and there are blueberry pancakes ahead of him and decided the math was acceptable. He picked up his fork in anticipation. Emily moved to the counter and started pulling ingredients. Her hands were steady. She noticed this specifically, the steadiness of them, because they hadn't been steady for most of the past several hours, and the return of steadiness felt like something worth noting. She was cracking the second egg when she heard footsteps behind her. She knew them without turning around. I thought you were in the study, she said. I was. Vincent stopped somewhere behind her, not close, not far. The distance of a man who is calibrating. Gerald is gone. Marco is taking care of the documentation end. I heard. A pause. You were listening outside the door, he said. The door wasn't fully latched. Emily. You didn't tell me to leave? Another pause, and she could feel him deciding how to respond to this, and she could feel, without seeing it, the almost smile at the corner of his mouth. No, he said. I didn't. She folded the blueberries into the batter. Charlie was watching his father with the open, uncomplicated adoration of a boy who has been scared for his father and found him standing in the kitchen and decided that everything is therefore fine. Elena was watching with more complexity, taking in the bruise, the careful way he held himself, the fact that he was here present, choosing the kitchen over the study. Sit down, Emily said. All of you. Vincent sat. She felt him do it, felt a slight adjustment in the room's atmosphere, the way the weight of the morning shifted when he stopped standing at its edge and settled into it instead. She poured the first round of batter. Emily, Charlie said. Yes, sweetheart. Are you going to leave? The question landed in the middle of the kitchen like something breakable. Emily kept her eyes on the pan. What do you mean, Veronica left, Charlie said. His voice was very matter-of-fact, the matter-of-factness of a child who has learned to ask direct questions about painful things because the not knowing is worse than the knowing. People leave. Are you going to leave too? Emily set down the spatula. She turned around. Vincent was looking at her, not with the expression she'd expected, not the carefully neutral expression of a man waiting to hear what the staff member was going to say. He was looking at her with the expression he'd worn in the hallway at 5 in the morning, the one that had sent her to bed with her hands pressed flat on her knees. Unguarded, waiting, wanting. She looked at Charlie. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I promise. Charlie nodded satisfied and picked up his fork again. It was that simple for him. A promise from Emily was a settled thing. Elena across the table was looking between Emily and her father with the alert, quiet attention of someone filing something important. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Emily turned back to the stove. Behind her, Vincent said very quietly for her ears only, he's not the only one who needed to hear that. Her hand stilled on the spatula handle. She didn't turn around. But she felt it, the specific, complicated weight of those words, the way they pressed against something she'd been keeping very carefully contained for a very long time. She flipped the pancake. Then it's good I said it loud enough, she replied. The kitchen went quiet in a way that was completely different from every other quiet of the past 12 hours. Not the quiet of crisis or fear or someone listening for danger. The quiet of something settling, something that had been off balance for a long time, finding tentatively the beginning of its equilibrium. Charlie broke it with the timing only small children possess. Can I have extra syrup? No, Emily and Vincent said simultaneously. Charlie groaned. Elena pressed her lips together over a smile. And for a moment, a single brief, uncomplicated moment, the crew's kitchen sounded exactly like what it had never quite been, but had always needed to be. Marco found Emily on the back porch at 9:30, her tea finally warm enough to drink, her eyes on the middle distance, while her brain attempted the work of processing a night that had contained approximately a week's worth of events. He sat beside her without being invited, which meant he had something to say that required sitting. Gerald Hale isn't the last of it, he said. I know. The people he was working with, the cast and trust, isn't just his money. There are other parties involved. People who have interests in the crew's assets that go further back than Gerald's arrangement with Veronica. He paused. Vincent is handling it. He's been handling it. But it's not simple, and it's not fast, and it isn't safe, Emily finished. Not entirely. Not yet. She wrapped both hands around her mug. He told me he was working on it. He's been working on it for 8 months. What happened last night accelerated his hand. Marco was quiet for a moment. He moved faster than he intended to with Gerald this morning because you had the document, because you came to his room, because he stopped. He made decisions this morning that he wouldn't have made if you hadn't pushed. Emily looked at him. Is that bad? Marco seemed to consider the question with genuine seriousness. No, he said finally. I don't think it is. I think he's made better decisions in the past 12 hours than in the past 14 months. I just thought you should know you're part of this now, whether you want to be or not. He paused. Do you want to be? She thought about Charlie's question at the breakfast table. Are you going to leave? She thought about the answer she'd given and the person it had been aimed at and the quiet that had followed. I've been part of this for 2 years, she said. I just didn't say it out loud. Marco nodded slowly. Then say it to him, he said, when the time is right. Don't wait too long. He stood. Men like Vincent, they don't ask twice. When they finally ask something, it costs them. You don't want to make it cost more than it has to. He went back inside. Emily sat with her tea in the morning light and the sound of Charlie's laughter drifting through the kitchen window. Something about syrup. Something about Elena telling him he was impossible. Something that sounded so ordinary and so precious that she had to press her lips together against the feeling it brought. She thought about what Marco had said. She thought about 8 months of Vincent quietly dismantling a trap someone had spent years building around him. She thought about the man who had lain on a cold marble floor with cracked ribs and forced himself to stay still long enough to get what he needed. She thought about the man who had looked at his daughter over a kitchen table at 4:30 in the morning and said I should have seen it sooner without excusing himself for not seeing it. She thought about the fact that she had spent 2 years telling herself the line she was walking was professional. Clear, manageable. She put down her mug. She looked at the kitchen window. She thought I have been lying to myself for a very long time. And then Charlie's face appeared at the window, both hands pressed to the glass, breath fogging it, because he had apparently decided that Emily had been outside long enough and was manifesting his objection through sheer proximity. She stood up. She went back inside. The day improbably was beginning, and it was nothing like the day any of them had expected to have. But it was Emily, thought stepping back into the warmth of the kitchen, stepping back into the noise and the light, and the 2 children, and the man who was standing at the counter reading something on his phone, and looked up when she came in, and there it was again. That look, the one she no longer pretended she didn't understand, it was against all the odds of the night that had preceded it, exactly the day they needed. The call came at 11:17 in the morning. Vincent was in the study, 3 files open on his desk, phone in hand, working through the unwinding of 14 months of Gerald Hale's careful construction with the focused efficiency of a man who has been waiting a long time to do exactly this. His attorney was on one line. His financial advisor was on another. Marco was moving through the house with the quiet, purposeful energy of someone executing a plan that had been ready and waiting for the right moment. Emily was upstairs with the children when she heard Vincent's voice change. She couldn't make out the words, just the register. The particular drop in pitch and pace that she'd come to recognize over 2 years as the sound of Vincent Cruz receiving information that required him to recalibrate everything he thought he knew. She heard him say, when, then, how certain, then nothing for a long time. Elena looked up from her book. Children, Emily had long observed, are finely tuned instruments for parental distress. They hear the things adults think they've hidden. Is something wrong? Elena asked. I don't know yet, Emily said. Honest, always honest with this child. Stay here. She went downstairs. Chem. Vincent was standing at his desk when she came in, not sitting, which meant whatever he'd heard had taken sitting off the table. He had his hand pressed flat on the surface the way she'd pressed hers on the counter that morning, steadying himself against something shifting beneath him. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. Close the door, he said. She closed it. Veronica Dree said didn't go to a hotel last night. Emily waited. She went to Raymond Caston. He watched Emily's face process the name and saw the moment she placed it, the Caston Trust, the document Marco had found the name that sat behind Gerald Hale's operation like a load-bearing wall. Raymond Caston is not just a financial partner in Gerald's arrangement. He is, Vincent stopped, set the phone down, picked it up again. He has been building a case for the past 3 years to challenge the legitimacy of my ownership of several key assets, properties that have been in the Cruz estate for decades. He's been waiting for a legal mechanism. The marriage to Veronica with the prenuptial terms Gerald constructed was going to be that mechanism. He looked at her. If the wedding had happened, and if anything had subsequently happened to me, the agreement Gerald built would have given Veronica, and through her Gerald, and through him, Caston, legitimate legal standing to contest the entire estate structure. Emily stared at him. On behalf of the children. On behalf of the children, he confirmed. Nominally. In reality, by the time any of it played out in court, the children's portion would have been reduced to whatever Caston decided was appropriate to leave them. His jaw tightened, which would have been enough to keep lawyers busy and not enough to matter. And Veronica going to Caston last night tells me she's pivoted. He looked at the window. She knows the wedding isn't happening. She knows Gerald walked in here this morning and walked out with nothing. So she's going directly to the source. She's positioning herself as a witness, someone with inside knowledge of the Cruz household willing to provide testimony in support of Caston's asset challenge. A pause. She may have recordings. I don't know yet what she kept. Emily felt the morning's fragile sense of resolution dissolve like sugar in water, fast complete, leaving nothing behind. So it's not over. It was never going to be over this quickly. He said it without bitterness. Just fact. I told you last night working on it. This is what I meant. You knew Caston was the real problem. I knew Caston was the real problem. He finally sat, in the controlled care with which he did it, reminded her that under his suit jacket were 2 cracked ribs that had not improved during a morning of sustained crisis management. Gerald was always the accessible piece, the one I could reach and document and neutralize in a single conversation. Caston is... He paused, choosing the word different. He's careful, he's patient, and he's been doing this kind of work for 30 years. What does he want? Emily asked. Ultimately, not the assets, not the legal maneuvering. What does Raymond Caston actually want? Vincent looked at her. He wants what everyone who has ever come at me wants, he said. He wants the Cruz name to mean something smaller than it does. He held her gaze. He's not going to get it. The certainty in his voice was not bravado. It was the specific, grounded confidence of a man who has survived 11 years of people wanting things he wasn't willing to give and is still sitting at his desk. What do you need? Emily said. What Vincent needed, it turned out, was a witness, not a legal one, not a formal deposition or an affidavit or anything that involved courtrooms or attorneys, at least not yet. He needed someone who had been in the house for the past 2 years. Someone who had observed Veronica's behavior with the children, documented its effects, tracked the patterns. Someone whose testimony, if it came to it, would be credible, detailed, and impossible to dismiss as strategically motivated, because nothing about this person's position suggested strategy. A nanny. You've been keeping notes, he said. It wasn't a question. Emily didn't look away. I keep a daily log of the children's welfare. Their emotional state, behavioral changes, incidents that concern me. It's standard professional practice. How detailed? Very. How far back? 2 years. He looked at her for a long moment. Emily, did you document Veronica's interactions with the children? I documented everything that affected the children's welfare, she said carefully. Veronica's interactions with them affected their welfare. Regularly, so yes. The expression that crossed his face then was complex enough that she couldn't fully read it. Relief and regret, and something else, something that had to do with the specific pain of finding out in precise documented detail the ways you failed to protect your own children. I'd like to see it, he said. I know, she said, but I want to tell you something first. He waited. Reading it is going to be hard. She said it directly without softening it the way she always told him true things. Some of what's in there, the way she spoke to them when you weren't in the room, the incidents that happened while you were traveling, you're going to want to react. I need you to read it and sit with it before you do anything, because reacting before you've processed it will not help Elena and Charlie. They need you steady, not angry on their behalf, even though you have every right to be angry. Steady. A long pause. You're telling me how to manage my own emotional response, he said. Yes. Another pause. Then, all right. She got the notebook. She sat across from him while he read it. She didn't offer commentary. She didn't watch his face. She looked at the window, giving him the privacy of her averted gaze while he moved through 2 years of careful, dated specific entries. She heard him stop twice, heard the slight change in his breathing that meant something had landed, heard the controlled, deliberate exhale that followed each time. When he finished, he set the notebook on the desk. He said nothing for a full minute, then, October 14th. She knew which entry without checking. Yes. She told him crying was for babies. He'd fallen off his bike. He needed stitches. Emily kept her voice even. He didn't cry. He held it until she left the room, and then he cried for 20 minutes in my arms and asked me not to tell you because he didn't want you to think he was weak. Something broke in Vincent Cruz's face. Not dramatically, not the way things break in movies, not loudly or expressively. It broke the way things break in real life, which is quietly and in a single specific place, and then the person rebuilding it immediately because the alternative is not available to them. He's 7 years old, Vincent said. Yes, Emily said. He is. Vincent stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long time with his back to her and his hand pressed against the glass, and she let him stand there because this was necessary. Because this was the part that had to happen before anything else could. When he turned back around, his face was composed. But his eyes were different. Something in them had been permanently rearranged, and Emily recognized what it was because she had seen it once before, 14 months ago, when he'd come back from a business trip and Charlie had run to him, and he'd held the boy for just a beat too long. And she'd understood, watching, that Vincent Cruz was a man who loved his children with a fierceness that was almost painful to witness and had very few resources for handling that love safely. I have to do better, he said. Yes, Emily said. You do. He looked at her. I'm aware you were not supposed to say that to your employer. You're not my employer right now, she said. You're the father of 2 children I love. Right now, that takes precedence. The word landed between them. Love. Said plainly without drama, aimed at the children and managing somehow to mean something slightly larger than it was aimed at. Vincent didn't look away. Emily. The study door opened. Elena stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who has been patient long enough. Charlie ate the last of the blueberries, she announced, straight from the container. And I'm telling you right now, I had nothing to do with it. Emily pressed her lips together. Vincent, for the first time in the entire tenure of this catastrophic morning, laughed. A real one. Short and genuine, startled out of him by a 9-year-old with her mother's timing. Tell him to come here, Vincent said. He's hiding, Elena said. Tell him I'm not angry. Elena considered this with judicial seriousness. Are you not angry, or are you saying you're not angry? Elena. I'm asking for accuracy, Dad. He's going to ask me. Tell him I'm not angry and there are no consequences for the blueberries. He looked at Emily. Tell him I want to talk to him. Elena retreated. They heard her voice in the hallway. Charlie, Dad says come here. No, you're not in trouble. I know what I said before I was wrong because he said so. Charlie just... A pause. He said he wants to talk to you. Different. Footsteps. Small. Hesitant. Charlie appeared in the doorway, blueberry evidence faintly visible at the corner of his mouth, eyes calibrated to assess the emotional weather of the room with the survivalist precision of the youngest child of a complicated man. Vincent crossed to him. He crouched down, ignoring the ribs, and looked at his son at eye level. Charlie looked back with enormous eyes. I need to tell you something, Vincent said. Is it about the blueberries? It's not about the blueberries. He held the boy's gaze. I haven't been paying enough attention to you and to your sister. And I'm sorry. Charlie blinked. This was not the script he'd arrived prepared for. Okay, he said cautiously. It's not okay, Vincent said. but I'm going to fix it, starting now. He held his son's gaze. Is there anything you want to tell me? Anything that's been... He paused, finding the word heavy. Charlie thought about this with the genuine seriousness of a 7-year-old approaching a real question. Then he looked sideways at Emily, a quick check, a confirmation. She gave him the smallest nod. He looked back at his father. I was scared when you were on the floor, he said. I thought you were dead, and I didn't know what would happen to us. I know, Vincent said. I'm sorry you were scared. And Charlie stopped. Tell me. Veronica said once that you were going to be too busy for us after the wedding. He said it fast, the way children say things they've been holding all at once before courage runs out. She said that's just how it was going to be, and I believed her. The silence that followed was the softest, most devastating silence Emily had ever sat inside. She was wrong, Vincent said. His voice was steady and absolute, and it had none of the qualities of a man saying what his child needed to hear. It had the quality of a man saying the thing he had just at significant cost figured out how to mean. You are never going to be something I'm too busy for. Do you understand? Charlie nodded. Then, because he was 7 and love for him was a tactile thing, he stepped forward and pressed his face against his father's shoulder, and Vincent's arms came around him with a completeness that Emily had to look away from because it was too private and too real for a witness. Elena appeared behind Charlie. She looked at Emily. Emily looked at her. Come here, Emily said. Elena crossed to her and Emily put an arm around her, and they stood together at the edge of the room while Vincent held Charlie and nobody said anything because nothing needed to be said. Raymond Caston made his move at 2 in the afternoon, not in person, through lawyers of filing elegantly structured and precisely timed, challenging the legitimacy of 2 specific asset transfers in the Coos estate dating back 11 years. It was a shot across the bow, a signal, a message that said, I know your morning was difficult. I know you think you've resolved something. I want you to understand that you have not. Vincent's attorney called with the filing while Vincent was sitting in the garden with his children, something Emily had never seen him do on a weekday afternoon, something that told her the conversation in the study had done what it needed to do. He took the call for 90 seconds. He said 4 words into the phone. I'll call you back. He hung up. He looked at Charlie, who was telling him something complicated about a video game with the earnest, detailed investment that children bring to subjects adults have not yet demonstrated sufficient enthusiasm for. He listened to the whole story. Then he told Emily quietly when the children moved away. Caston filed. I know what I heard, she said. It's not a problem. He said it with a calm she was still learning to distinguish between genuine and performed. This was genuine. My attorney has been ready for this filing for 6 weeks. We have counter documentation for every point in it. The challenge fails unless Caston can produce a witness with credible inside knowledge of the estate's operations. He looked at her, which is why Veronica is with him. Emily felt the ground shift. She's going to testify. She's going to try. He turned to her fully. But anything she says about the estate's legitimacy is going to be her word against the documentation. And anything she says about the children's welfare, anything she tries to use as character evidence against me as a parent, as the custodial figure, he paused, runs directly into 2 years of your records. Emily understood. You need me to be a formal witness. I need you to be willing to be a formal witness. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to do this. I'm telling you what the situation is and asking what you want to do. There's a difference, she said quietly, echoing something he'd said to her the night before and saw him recognize it. There is, he confirmed. She thought about the notebook in the study. She thought about October 14th and a 7-year-old boy who had cried silently in her arms so no one would think he was weak. She thought about Elena's silence at dinner, 3 months of learned smallness, a 9-year-old swallowing herself to stay safe. I'll do it, she said. Emily. I'll do it, she said again. Firm, clear, no room in it for reconsideration. Don't talk me out of it. I mean it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, I wasn't going to talk you out of it. Good. I was going to say, he stopped. Whatever he'd been going to say required a different preparation than he'd brought to the conversation. He looked away, briefly, looked back. I was going to say that I know what this costs you. It puts you in the middle of something that isn't your fight. And you've been in the middle of things that aren't your fight for 2 years because you care about my children, and I have not, he stopped again. I have not adequately acknowledged that. She waited. I see it now, he said. I should have seen it a long time ago. He looked at her with the full direct attention that he normally reserved for people across negotiating tables, except that this wasn't the attention of a man calculating leverage. It was the attention of a man who has stopped calculating entirely and is simply looking. You are not the nanny, he said. You haven't been for a long time. I don't know what the right word is, but it isn't that. So an afternoon light through the garden window landed at the wrong angle to be sentimental. It was just light. The children were 20 feet away. Charlie back to his video game monologue, Elena reading with the focused intensity she brought to everything. The house was what it always was, large, complicated, carrying its history in every room. Emily looked at Vincent Cruz and thought about 2 years of a line she'd held carefully because it mattered that she hold it, because the children needed her to hold it, because the situation required it. She thought about every moment she had carefully, deliberately not said the thing she was thinking, and the accumulation of all those unsaid things like stones in her pockets. She thought about Marco saying, "Don't wait too long." "You know what I think," she said. "Tell me." "I think you should add in something, because you haven't since last night, and you have cracked ribs and a concussion in a legal battle starting this afternoon, and you need to be functional." She held his gaze. "And I think after all of that is done, after the lawyers and the filing and whatever Caston throws at you next, I think we should have a conversation." She paused. "A different kind of conversation than we've been having." He looked at her steadily. "How different?" "Different enough that I want to wait until the crises are resolved before we have it," she said, "because I want both of us to be fully present for it. And right now you're managing about 4 simultaneous crises and a concussion." The almost smile, more present than usual. "That's a very practical approach to an impractical subject." "I'm a practical person." "You are," he said, "among other things." The Caston challenge collapsed in court 41 days later. It collapsed not with drama, but with the specific, quiet efficiency of a legal structure that was always hollow at its center, meeting documentation. That was anything but. Vincent's attorney submitted the counterfiling on a Tuesday. The judge reviewed the materials over 3 days. On Friday morning, the challenge was dismissed with a specificity that left no room for appeal on the points raised. Veronica's testimony, submitted in writing and never required in person, was reviewed and found to contradict documented records at 17 separate points. The presiding judge noted in his dismissal that the testimony demonstrated familiarity with the Cruz household without demonstrating the reliability of observation necessary for evidentiary weight, which was a legal way of saying she was there, but she wasn't paying the right kind of attention. Emily's records were submitted as supplementary documentation and were not challenged. Raymond Caston did not attempt further action. Men who operate through layers and mechanisms and other people's hands tend not to advance when the layers are stripped away and the hand they're operating through has been publicly discredited. He retreated, quietly, efficiently, without acknowledgement of defeat, the way certain kinds of dangerous men do when they've calculated that the cost of continuing exceeds the available return. Gerald Hale sent through his attorney a letter of agreement dissolving the Meridian accounts and the Caston trust arrangements. He did not send a personal message. He did not call. He simply efficiently removed himself from the architecture of his own scheme and went back to whatever he'd been before Veronica had been positioned in Vincent Cruz's life. Vincent received the letter on a Wednesday morning and set it aside without reading it twice. He found Emily that evening in the library, which had become over the past 6 weeks her preferred end-of-day location. A chair by the lamp, a book she was only half reading, the sound of the house settling into its nighttime rhythms around her. He sat across from her. She set the book down. "It's done," he said. She let out a breath. "All of it. Caston is finished. Gerald is gone. The filing is dismissed." He looked at her steadily. "All of it." She nodded. She looked at her hands. She looked at him. "You said you wanted a different kind of conversation," he said, "when everything was resolved." "I did say that." "Everything is resolved. I'm aware." A pause. "Emily." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at her with the focused, unguarded attention that she'd spent 2 years being careful not to read too much into, and the past 6 weeks being careful not to read too little. I have spent the better part of 20 years making sure there are no loose ends in anything I do. No ambiguities, no unresolved questions. He paused. There is a significant unresolved question in this house, and I am not comfortable leaving it unresolved. She looked at him. Ask it then. I'm trying to determine the right framing. Vincent. She almost smiled. Almost. Just ask it. He held her gaze. Will you stay, he said, not as the nanny, not as a member of the staff, as part of this, whatever part you're willing to be. He paused. I'm aware that's vague. I'm being deliberately vague because I don't want to name something that you haven't had the chance to decide you want. But I need you to know that I see you, what you are, what you've done, what you mean to my children. He stopped. What you mean to me? The lamp was warm. The house was quiet in its good way, the way it had been increasingly over the past 6 weeks now that the architecture of fear and performance that Veronica had built into it had finished dissolving. Somewhere upstairs, she could hear Charlie's feet hit the floor, and then Elena's voice telling him to stop jumping, and then Charlie's voice saying he wasn't jumping, he was walking with enthusiasm, and Elena's response involving the word ridiculous. Emily listened to this. She thought about the first day she'd walked into this house 2 years ago, a woman with a professional manner and a quiet life and no intention of becoming essential to anyone. She thought about the specific moment somewhere around month 4 when she'd realized she had failed completely at not becoming essential. She thought about every choice she'd made since then that had quietly, incrementally, irrevocably brought her to this chair in this library across from this man. She thought about a marble floor at 3 a.m. and 2 fingers at a man's neck and the wild, uncalculated relief of a pulse. I already stayed, she said. The question was always whether you'd notice. Something in Vincent Cruz's face rearranged itself fundamentally and permanently, and what replaced the careful composure he'd worn for as long as she'd known him was something simpler and more real than she'd expected, something that looked without apology like happiness. I notice everything, he said. I was just slow. You were very slow, she confirmed. I know. He held out his hand, palm up across the space between their chairs. Simple, unstrategized. The gesture of a man who has spent a lifetime keeping his hands close to his body and is choosing deliberately to extend one. I'm working on it. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She thought about all the things that were still complicated, the world he lived in, the history it carried, the future that would require navigation she couldn't fully anticipate. She thought about cracked ribs and concussions and documents hidden behind bookshelves and children who deserved better and were getting it incrementally, one honest conversation at a time. She thought about how none of it was simple. She thought about how she had stopped needing it to be simple a long time ago. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, and it was the opposite of Veronica's grip on her wrist that first terrible night. It was careful and warm, and asked nothing she wasn't already prepared to give. Upstairs, Charlie's enthusiastic walking shook the ceiling. Elena's voice said, Dad is going to hear you with the righteous certainty of a sister who has decided that invoking paternal authority is the appropriate next move. Vincent looked at the ceiling. Emily pressed her lips together over the laugh. I should go up, he said. You should, she agreed. He stood. He didn't let go of her hand immediately. He looked at her for one moment longer with the particular unhurried attention of a man who has decided that looking at something carefully is no longer a risk he needs to manage. Come up, he said. You're part of this. She stood. They went up together toward the sound of his children, toward the noise and the warmth, and the ordinary, irreplaceable mess of a family that had been through the worst of itself and come out the other side into something that had no name yet, but was already unmistakably home. And that was where the story of Vincent Cruz and the nanny who refused to look away ended, not with the defeat of an enemy, not with the signing of a document, not with any of the dramatic machinery that had nearly consumed them both. It ended in a hallway, 2 people walking toward the sound of children who needed them. The night finally fully over the house around them settled and quiet in theirs. Some things once broken open become more whole than they were before. This family was one of them, and it would never be anything less again.